So real quickly, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through some frequently asked questions. So first and foremost, on the Submittable platform, if you do not know how to access your account, you can request your password. You'll just go to submittable.com, click the login button, then you will click the Forgot Password link. You'll enter the email address for the executive director listed on your application. That's the email address that is associated with your application in Submittable and with your account that we created for you in Submittable. And then you'll want to have your executive director check the email associated with that account and click that link to reset your password and log in. Once you're logged in, then you can click the submissions link next to the Submittable logo. After you click the submissions link, you'll click the name of the submission that you want to view. And from there, you'll click on the Forms tab and you'll be able to see a blue button that will pop up next to the reimbursement form, and you will click that blue button. We will make these slides available and the WebEx available after for viewing later, so you can go back and follow those instructions. Hopefully that will help you to get into and access your account if you've been having some trouble finding the links in the email to access your account. Once you're logged in and you access that form, all of the necessary worksheets and templates that you need to fill out for the categories that you're requesting reimbursement are located right there in that Submittable reimbursement form. As you're scrolling through the form, the first thing that you want to make sure that you do to make those templates accessible is select the categories that you're requesting reimbursement for. Once you select those categories, all you will have to do is drag and drop your files into the appropriate fields. So you can see a screenshot example here of what that looks like. So this is for the salary section on the form. You'll just simply drag files from your desktop into this dotted line space here, and then you'll be able to upload your files. You can also click Choose File and browse to find those files, but the main thing is that both the upload fields and the worksheets that you need are all there in that form. So if you need to download a worksheet, you can just click where it says click here to download and fill out the required salaries worksheet. You'll click that blue link. That will have the file download for you, and then you'll be able to get in and upload that file once you're done filling out that worksheet. And we'll walk you through those worksheets here in a little bit. If you need to edit your Submittable application, there are instructions on submittable.com to be able to do that. We will certainly provide you that link after the WebEx whenever we post all of these materials. You can go in and request to edit your application. If you have missing documentation or we need additional documentation to complete our review, our reviewers will open your application for editing. You'll receive an email, and it's as simple as clicking the link in the bottom of that email in order to go in and submit that documentation. Got a couple of questions over the last few days about how Submittable saves your information. The safest thing and what we recommend is that you save your application periodically. If you're going to stop and come back to it, there is a button at the bottom of your application where you can save a draft of your application and come back to it. And we recommend that you do that periodically if you're gonna work on your application over multiple stems. Okay, we're going to answer some questions about eligible expenses. Starting off, what should you enter for the total amount requested if you submitted additional documentation? And the reason that you might submit additional documentation is if you're not certain about the eligibility of some of the expenses in the expenses that you're submitting. And this just gives us some padding to fall back on so that we can still award you that full award amount in case there's anything that doesn't fit within the federal guidance. So what you'll want to do on your application form is in your reimbursement worksheet, you can list all of those expenses that you want us to consider. And then once you get to the total amount that you're requesting, you'll want to enter no more than the total amount awarded. And if you make a mistake on this, we'll catch it in our review. We'll make sure that we're only giving you the total amount that you were approved for in your initial application. Can you change the categories that you were awarded funding for? So yes, you can flex funds across the different categories from your initial application. You can even flex funds into new categories if you didn't mention them in your initial application. The only cap that you need to worry about is that total award amount. You will not be able to receive more than what we approved you for in your initial application. We've gotten some questions about sales tax and just wanted to provide some clarification on this. If you are submitting expenses, let's say you went to Lowe's and you purchased items in order, maybe face masks or things like that, and you paid a local sales tax on that purchase, yes, you can submit that for reimbursement. However, if you owe sales tax to a local government entity or to the state on items that you have sold as part of your business, then no, that will not be eligible for reimbursement. We can only pay for the sales tax on items that you have purchased, on eligible items that you have purchased. Okay, moving into the salary section. How should we handle owner salaries? So we'll be able to reimburse owner salaries so long as they are documented through pay stubs and meet eligibility criteria just like other employees. Salaries for any employee cannot be paid in cash. We need to be able to see those pay stubs, and we need to be able to see that you have been paying taxes appropriately on those salaries and payroll. Owner draws from the organization's profits are not eligible for reimbursement. It has to be a documented salary with a pay stub.
And Maggie, just to add one more to that, is just that salaries are only eligible if there was a reduction in hours and people were continued to be paid. So they would have to be being paid for hours that you were closed or had reduction of hours.
Yep.
Or if we have some nonprofits on the phone for their over and above time.
Yep. Are payroll expenses reimbursable if my business never closed or reduced its hours? No, unless the payroll expenses were for additional hours over and above their normal pay for sanitation or other purposes related to mitigating the spread of COVID-19, they are not eligible. If you lost sales as a result of COVID-19, though, you may want to consider looking at the overhead section of the reimbursement form to see if you have any eligible expenses that would qualify. And we'll talk about the overhead section here in just a little bit. Is retroactive payroll eligible if we could not pay employees previously? You cannot be reimbursed for retroactively paying employees their regular pay, even if you were closed or reduced hours. The only retroactive payroll that is eligible for reimbursement is hazard pay. So what qualifies as hazard pay? Hazard pay is additional pay for performing hazardous duty or work involving physical hardship that is related to COVID-19. So in order to qualify, for example, hazard pay could be covered for a food pantry if their employees use their time distributing food and other direct assistance in person. So the key here is that you probably need to be working with the public, and you need to be someone who may have been at risk if you were in your job duties in order to qualify for hazard pay. So someone who is teleworking or someone who is in the office answering phones and not working with the public likely would not be considered eligible for hazard pay. Also, across the board hazard pay for all members of an organization, regardless of their duties, would not be able to be covered. Hazard pay does not include bonus or incentive payments, and this is very important as we think ahead to when we may be audited by the federal government on these expenses. We want to make sure that we're meeting that federal guidance, which says that we cannot include bonuses or incentives. Those are not eligible. If you meet the definition of hazard pay in your application, please label that as hazard pay so that we can ensure that it is eligible and that we can document that and prove that should we be audited by the federal government. Okay, moving on to the overhead section. How do I submit loss of revenue? Well, the answer is that you are not able to request reimbursement for loss of revenue directly. What you can do is you can submit overhead expenses for a prorated reimbursement if you experience loss of sales, closure, or reduced hours. Loss of revenue is not eligible for reimbursement directly under the federal guidance. So what qualifies as overhead? Overhead refers to non-labor expenses to operate your business, which can include rent or mortgage, insurance, utilities, which could include electric, gas, phones, and internet, and storage expenses. Are property taxes included under overhead? No, property taxes are not eligible for reimbursement. And the reason for that is that there are provisions in the CARES Act guidance that say that we cannot reimburse local municipal entities. Is rent eligible as overhead? So rent for leased facilities can be eligible for reimbursement if the business was not operating, or if the business was operating at reduced hours, or if the business saw a decrease in sales resulting from COVID-19. If one of those three things is the case, then the rent reimbursement will be prorated along with the utilities. Rent may also be eligible if the business owner was required to lease additional space in order to continue operating. So if, let's say that you rented additional space in order to accommodate social distancing, then we could consider that eligible. It may also be eligible if you maintained a lease that otherwise would have been abandoned but for COVID-19. Similar to, this is the guidance on mortgages. We have an error up here. So I'm just going to correct that real quick so that we don't have any confusion. Similar to monthly rent payments, a prorated amount of mortgage payment could be eligible for reimbursement as overhead based on a decrease in sales or a decrease in hours of operation. If the mortgage is for a new facility that, one, was purchased or built in order to accommodate for COVID-19 safety regulations and business disruptions, and two, was not included in the budget prior to COVID-19, then the new mortgage would also be eligible for reimbursement. Mortgage payments that meet this criteria and have been paid prior to the reimbursement request or were paid during the period of March 1st through November 16th would be eligible costs. You will need to show documentation of the mortgage agreement and proof of payment in order to be reimbursed for a mortgage expense.
Maggie, I would just add that the overhead and mortgage is specific to the small business grant. If you didn't already say that, you may have. I missed it. Sorry.
Yep. Is leased equipment considered overhead? No, it's considered equipment. We did have a change on the guidance for overhead for municipal utilities. And so you are able to submit utility expenses as long as they meet the other criteria for overhead. So you had loss of sales or reduced hours, and you can document that. We will be able to reimburse you for expenses from municipal utilities, Okay, perishable inventory. So what is considered perishable inventory? Perishable inventory is inventory that's by its nature is likely to spoil or decay. That's the key here. And that has an actual expiration, use by, or best by date. The inventory being replaced must have expired or spoiled during the covered period, so March 1st to November 16th. Okay, equipment. We've gotten a lot of questions about vehicle purchases and want to just make sure that we are 100% clear on vehicle purchases. So the purchase of an additional vehicle for increased deliveries would be considered eligible if it were deemed to have been a reasonable purchase at the time and necessary with respect to COVID-19. This means that the company or organization was not able to meet the need arising from the public health emergency in a cost-effective manner by leasing a vehicle or using a vehicle already owned by the organization. You'll need to provide supporting documentation to show that you could not have leased a vehicle in a more cost-effective way than purchasing a vehicle. In addition, the vehicle must be acquired and used for the intended purposes by December 30th. Costs that meet the preceding criteria must have been paid for prior to submitting your reimbursement request and must be incurred between March 1st and December 30th in order to be considered eligible. So this includes initial payments, monthly payments, and total payments, but it excludes licensing, taxes, and insurance for the vehicle. Proof of payment for costs incurred during November are due along with all documentation on November 16th at 5 p.m. If you are financing the vehicle, the business would also need to submit documentation of the credit or loan agreement, and only payments made on the loan or credit between March 1st and November 16th will be eligible for reimbursement. I'd add that this is listed on the website, and you can read through it at ded.mo.gov/cares and go to your program page and take a look at the FAQs at the bottom of the page under equipment. If equipment is not received by December 30th, can it be reimbursed? Per federal guidance, goods must be received by December 30th to be reimbursed. Okay, we're going to get down into the documentation section. So what do I upload for my expenses and proof of payment? There are lists of acceptable documentation and examples of acceptable documentation at ded.mo.gov/cares. Generally, proof of expense could contain invoices, receipts, pay stubs. These documents tell us what you purchased. Proof of payment could be bank or credit card statements or canceled checks to show that you have paid the vendor or individual. Proof of payment must show the financial institution's name on it. So, and we're going to get into this here in a second. If you don't have your bank statement yet, then you need to go onto your online account and print off the documentation from your online account. We will, if you're printing from an electronic banking system, we will need to be able to see the name on the account, and we will need to be able to see the name of the banking institution. Do checks need to have cleared to be eligible? Yes. Checks must have cleared the bank to be considered. What can we use for documentation if we won't have our statement in time? As I mentioned, you'll need to show that the expenses have been paid by November 16th. This can include printing documentation from your online banking or credit card account, but you need to make sure that what you print clearly shows the banking institution name and the name on the account. If you paid using a personal account, there's an FAQ listed on the website. I'm not going to read through this entire slide. There's an FAQ that lists out exactly how you need to document that to show that the payment was made to the vendor and to show that the reimbursement was made to the individual so that the business can receive reimbursement. We've gotten a lot of questions about Missouri buys, and what I would tell you first and foremost is that you will not be rejected if you enter your Missouri buys ID incorrectly on your reimbursement form. As long as the other information entered matches what's listed in your Missouri buys account, we will be able to look up your Missouri buys ID for you once you submit your reimbursement form. General question. Is the grant award taxable? If you're a business, yes. The receipt of a government grant by a business generally is not excluded from the business's gross income under the code and therefore is taxable. How can I organize and highlight things to make it easier for you? There's no guidance. We appreciate every effort that you make to help us get through these reviews as quickly as possible and to document and help us match up your proof of payment with your proof of expense. And we appreciate anything you do. It will be helpful. Can you check to make sure all of my documentation came through? So currently our reviewers are working through all of the applications that have come in, and as we've mentioned in previous webinars, we'll have about 1,500 applications that we need to review across our review team. We're working to get through those as quickly as possible. If there's anything amiss in your application, we will let you know and we'll ask you for additional documentation. Until we can get through those reviews, it's really a matter of checking your account to check your status, and then you can do that at any time in your submittable account, but we'll let you know when we get to your application and we can review it. When will I get my reimbursement? So similar story here. We're working as hard as we can to get through all of the applications that are coming in and to process them as quickly as possible. All payments will be made by December 30th. Okay, that is those are the FAQs that we were going to go through. Next up, we're going to do a quick walkthrough to help anyone out who's maybe having some challenges with the reimbursement forms. Do you want to talk about the reimbursement forms?
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So I'm going to go through the reimbursement, how to complete your reimbursement request worksheets for the small business grant. We're going to focus on the small business grant, but I know there's some family and farm folks on the line as well. Sort of the key points here is you're going to complete at least one or possibly all of these worksheets: a salaries worksheet, an overhead worksheet, a remaining categories worksheet, which would be for categories such as supplies, equipment and technology, facility reconfiguration, solid waste, perishable inventory, and others. So there's those three worksheets. The salaries worksheet is the most complicated, followed by overhead worksheet, and then the remaining categories worksheet is the simplest. You'll download each of these worksheets from your submittable workflow. I should note that if you did download before November 7th, please re-download them. And again, that's in your submittable workflow. Of course, remember that the FAQ support and instructional videos are on the FAQ site, and there are some videos going over these worksheets. Quick update, quick kind of review of the process. We're discussing the applicant completing reimbursement forms. The first step is if you are going to be requesting salary reimbursements or overhead reimbursements, you're going to be determining your prorated percent eligible and submittable. And then you're going to complete your salaries Excel worksheet, and then your overhead Excel worksheet, and then your remaining categories Excel worksheet. And so I'm going to go through each of those. Maggie, just to confirm, does it make sense for me to review how to calculate prorated percent eligible within submittable?
Yes, absolutely, if you don't mind.
Yep, no problem. Got it pulled up right here. Okay. So as an example, we're gonna pretend we're a small business. Let's say we're a restaurant, casual dining restaurant that was closed for a period. Let's say from April 1st through May 15th. Let's say it's reduced hours, and so there's this question within submittable as you go down. If you indicate that you had a closure or reduced hours, it's going to ask you, is there multiple periods? You might say yes. If so, you'll want to include the dates for those closure or reduced hours. For this example, we're going to say no. The start date of the reduced hours was April 1st. The end date was May 15th. And the explanation why, let's say there's a stay-at-home order. You want to put more details. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay. So here's an example of how not to do the reduced hours. But what you'll want to do is you'll want to calculate during that period. In this case, it's April 1st through May 15th. What would the normal hours typically be? And let's say in this case, the normal hours would have been 600 hours. But unfortunately, due to the stay-at-home order, we had to reduce the hours of this casual dining restaurant. So it was only 400 hours. And this prorated percent eligible is going to calculate the difference between the actual hours and the normal hours, and then divide it by the normal. And so basically, you've got a prorated percent eligible of 33.3%. And this is what you're going to use to, if you had employees that were paid their normal wages during this period of reduced hours, you'll use this prorated percent eligible. So after we've done that, we're going to go to our salary worksheet. Again, this salary worksheet is the most complicated one, so bear with me a little bit. We're just going to show a couple of quick examples. This is Jane's casual dining. And then the contact will be Jane Doe. I should mention that we built this worksheet in a way that's intended to help our reviewers review as quickly as possible and to make sure that the data here is as accurate as possible. And so you'll notice there's many areas you actually can't input data, and that's on purpose, just so that there's no issues with the form getting messed up. And again, this will help our review process so that we can review your information and process your grants as quickly as possible. You'll notice if you hover over if you see a red triangle, if you hover over it, you can get more information on the field. And then you'll also notice many of the fields require certain types of data. For example, date paid. You're going to need to put in a date here. You can't put in text. You have to put in a date. So we're just going to show a quick example. And so we're going to have this employee be Johnny Doe. And was this a new position hired? No, Johnny was an existing employee. And his actual total pay for the period was $600. His normal pay for the period was $600. And proof of expense type, there's going to be a little drop-down arrow. We're going to use that. So we're going to use a payroll stub. Now, here's where we do the prorated percent eligible. If you recall, we calculated the prorated percent eligible is 33.3%. So we need to make sure we go ahead and get that into this yellow box here. So we put 33.3. Okay. And so we know that, let's say the payroll period is over a month, so it's 30 days. Typically it's every 2 weeks, but you can use whatever works for your business. So 30 days are the number of days within the payroll period. And the number of days that overlapped with the reduced business hours, well, if you recall, the business was closed the entire month of April and into mid-May. So this is actually the entire period are the days that it overlapped. And there's some other columns here. Hazard pay, pay from additional hours. We're not going to fill that out because this is just about Johnny working time. Or there was reduced business hours, but he was paid at his normal rate. His actual rate was the same as his normal. Okay. And then so you'll see the line item total. And what this did was this just basically calculated using this prorated percent times the normal rate of $600 that he was paid. We've got that for Johnny. Maggie, I'm inclined to kind of not go through the salaries any further unless you think it would be helpful to kind of illustrate more examples here.
I think that will cover the bulk of the questions that were out there. We can certainly revisit it as we get into Q&A.
Okay, great. And so for more details here, please do watch the video. It does go into several more examples of salary. Let's go ahead and go to the overhead. Now, with calculating the overhead, you can use either. So for the salaries worksheet, there must have been a period of business closure or reduced hours. But for overhead, you can actually choose. Do you want to consider your reduced hours, or do you want to consider loss of sales? So in this example, we are going to suggest that there was loss of sales. Okay, sorry about that. I have to find the button. So when you click the overhead sheet, there's loss of sales. So we're going to calculate our prorated percent eligible from loss of sales. So let's say there is the same time period. Normally, the business, casual dining restaurant, would have earned, let's say, $200,000 of revenue, but instead, it only earned $100,000 in sales. So the difference between your actual and your normal divided by your normal is 50%. So your prorated percent eligible for loss of sales would actually be 50%. Now, when you're going to complete your overhead worksheet, you can choose. Do you use the reduced hours if that's eligible? And that would be 33%, or perhaps loss of sales, 50%. And so if we want to use the loss of sales, we want to, of course, complete the date information. And in this example, we're going to use, April 1st through May 15th. But the loss of sales might be a different period. It might be a longer period. It might be shorter. It's really up to you for when you want to calculate that. So we're going to go ahead and complete our overhead worksheet. Okay, so again, it's, we've got Jane Doe's casual dining. And let's go ahead and put our prorated percent eligible for loss of sales at 50%. Okay. And then I'm just going to give you one example here, but this sheet is still made the same as the salaries in many ways. It's locked down, so it's hard to make errors here. You'll want to use your, you can hover over the descriptions to see what you need to do in the fields. But let's go ahead. Let's assume that there's a utility payment. So say for the month of April, let's say you had your ABC utility company. You'll see some red fields pop up. That just means you have to fill it out. So we'll just say this is our monthly utility payment. The total amount on the invoice or receipt, let's say it's $500. Let's say it's $200. You'll want to do the receipt number, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's just an example. Number of days on the invoice would be 30. The number of the days that the receipt overlaps with the reduced business activity. Now, we know that there was lots of sales from April 1st through May 15th, so that'd be all 30 days for that April invoice for the utility payment. The proof of payment type, let's use a bank or credit card statement, and then we'll just say, A123 is the proof of payment. And what this does is for the $200 that you paid, you got a 50% prorated percent eligible. That's a line item total of 100. Again, this just calculates automatically, and it automatically goes to the top. All of these line item totals will go up here. I should have mentioned, you do not need to worry about these items in black. These are for our reviewers. Again, these will calculate automatically. All you have to worry about is your prorated percent eligible and getting these in here. I should mention, if this was for May, and let's say that, for example, there's 30 days included in the invoice, but the reduced sales was only through May 15th. You'd want to put 15 days of overlap, and that will reduce the calculated amount of the overhead that you can request reimbursement for. So that is our overhead worksheet. Again, please see the video for more details and more examples. And I'm going to end this with a quick review of the remaining categories. Again, these are anything that are not salaries or overhead. And this is a simpler worksheet. It supplies, equipment, technology, facility reconfiguration, solid waste disposal, beyond pre-COVID levels, perishable inventory, and other that's not overhead. So we're just going to take an example here. Do supplies. We'll put a date. Call this ABC Supply Company. You'll want to pick a COVID category. Now this is a drop down, so you'll find a little drop down here. So let's just say this was, personal protective equipment. We'll say that these were masks for staff, bulk purchase, total amount on invoice. We'll just call this $100. Now this sheet also calculates automatically, but there's nothing here. That's because the receipt might actually have items more than what you're requesting reimbursement for. So if every item on the receipt that you're requesting reimbursement for, you put $100, and then you'll see that it automatically calculates the 100 and it kind of goes to the top, and it's organized by supplies. And all of these, as you fill out your remaining categories spreadsheet, all of these items will fill out as you complete each line item. And of course, if you see a red box, you do need to enter some information there And if you see a little drop down arrow, just make sure you pick one of these. Okay, so I just want to just kind of do a quick review. So we went through determining your prorated percent eligible. We went through the salary Excel worksheet, the overhead Excel worksheet, and the remaining categories Excel worksheet. After you do all those, you want to make sure that you use those final totals. You want to make sure you use those final totals, and I should have shown you this, but each one of these is total. You'll want to put that into submittable. And then after you do that, you're all set. So the key points are you've got these 3 worksheets, and make sure you download the worksheets from Submittable. And of course, there's a lot more FAQ support and instructional videos on the website. And that's all I've got.
Okay, Paul, one question from Rwanda that I see for you. Do we list the salaries in their entirety for each payroll period during the period of shutdown?
So I might ask either Kim or Brenda to speak to that. I would say whatever for every single paycheck, you'll want to put every single paycheck on here. So if Johnny Doe received another paycheck in May, you'd want to include that, even though he's the same person. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question though.
Yeah, I think the answer is in the actual total pay for pay period, you want to make sure that you are including the full amount. And if you experience closure, the columns that are going to help you to prorate are columns G and H, the number of days in the payroll period and the number of days where there was overlap with reduced business hours. Okay, we're going to go through some questions here. And folks, I would really appreciate it if you do not use the Q&A for chat. Please use it for questions. We're trying to monitor which ones we get answered and which ones we don't. So Brenda, quick question. Are tips included as eligible wages for the time period in which the business had reduced hours?
Sorry, I got hung up by the mute. So tips are not included because the applicant doesn't generally pay the tips, and so those are not included and could not be monetized. I guess you wouldn't know how much they would have gotten at any particular time and be able to show what those dollars or how much those dollars should have been. So that is not an eligible expense.
How do we show monthly lease payments? I don't have an invoice for those. Will a copy of the original lease work for all payments?
Can you repeat that, Maggie?
Yep, it seems that they do not have an invoice for their lease payments. Will a copy of the original lease work for all of those payments?
So yeah, so you can include the lease because that will show what the monthly payment is, and then you will have to show proof of payment. So the lease will count as the invoice, and then the proof of payment would be the either the copy of the canceled check or your bank statement showing that it came out of your account, that sort of thing. And those things would need to match up.
Yeah. So in this case, the LLC partnership pays a partner rent. Paperwork shows this. Is this a problem?
So, the big thing about that is that that's a related party transaction, right? And so we have to understand that it's a reasonable rent amount. And so, we would kind of be looking at that if it looks like the rents are a lot higher because you're paying yourself, it's a related party thing, then we'd be looking at that. But there's nothing that prohibits you from including that as an overhead expense.
Okay. We have an
As long
auto
as
pay
it's-
monthly loan payment.
So,
We have an auto pay monthly loan payment. There is no receipt. Do we have loan documents and bank statements? Is that acceptable? So I think on this one, first of all, we need to be able to see what the loan is for. Loans by themselves are not reimbursable. It needs to qualify as an eligible expense. And then from there, I would work with whoever you are paying that loan to see if you can get an invoice to be able to document that. We will need to see what that loan is for and what it was used for. Brenda, do you agree?
yes.
Okay. Do credit cards need to be paid off? And the answer to that is we do not need to see that the statement has been paid. And we understand that, you know, you're submitting expenses up to the 16th. So we understand that the statement may not necessarily be paid if you are paying this at the end. Good with that one too, Brenda?
Yep.
So when we reach out to you, Rob, if there's anything, if you have any missing documentation on your application, we will be reaching out to you via email. So what will happen is we will open your application up for editing. You will receive an email from the submittable system. It'll go to the email on your account. And then you will be able to click into that email to see what is what we are needing you to submit and be able to resubmit your application. We did not have overhead as a category, but we have items that would be appropriate for reimbursement. How do we add overhead as a category? So when you're going through your reimbursement form, you'll just need to select overhead as a category, and this is true for any category on the reimbursement form. You'll just need to select that category in the initial questions on the submittable form, and then that will pop up the documentation slides and any other questions that you'll need to answer in order to provide the proper documentation for that category. In the example, hazard pay was included in the regular pay. If we write a separate check for hazard pay, will the worksheet understand the data? So I think if you list that on a separate line, then yes, I think that'll be okay as long as you list it as a separate line for that individual check. And then in the hazard pay column, you enter that as the amount for that hazard pay. Is that correct, Paul?
Maggie, I was responding to another question. Can you repeat that question?
Yep. So the question was if hazard pay was paid out by itself in a check, as opposed to as part of a paycheck, will the form be able to accommodate that? And my answer was, I believe they need to enter that as a new line in the spreadsheet, and then just enter hazard pay. They won't necessarily have to enter additional information beyond that. Is that correct? And can you maybe show how you would enter that example?
Yep, that is correct, and I can show you. So in the example, let's just say, call this Frank Doe. This was not a new position. Actual pay, 0. So there's $200 and, it's a payroll stub. We enter in $200 for actual and then $200 for hazard. And that should clear over to the line item total on the right. Does that answer the question, Maggie?
Yes, I think it did.
Okay.
Brenda, cash payments to people who did subcontracting work.
So we've said that cash payments are eligible, but you have to be able to document who it went to, that it was paid, and all of that. So there has to be an invoice, and we will be looking at those businesses, to make sure that they, clearly are like a construction business, those kinds of things. So we just need as much documentation as you have, and then we'll take a look at them.
So the recorded videos are all available at ded.mo.gov/cares. And I would also mention that you can find other help and the where to submit tickets if you need assistance at ded.mo.gov/cares. Do we have to choose between loss of sales or closure? My situation is both. So in that instance, yes, you're going to have to choose the prorated amount. If you're qualifying for overhead, you will have to choose either the prorated amount for loss of sales or closure. If it's not clear in your application which one you have chosen based on your worksheet, then we will take the higher percentage of the two. Where do we find our Missouri BICE number? My simple answer for you on this is enter whatever number you can find, as long as your information, there's documentation out there for how to find it, but as long as your information that you enter for the name on your business, the name of your business, those things, the ad for your business, as long as it matches your Missouri BICE account, then we will look you up and make sure that you've got the correct Missouri BICE number or correct it for you. Do we have to provide bank statements if our provider has documentation of bank and last 4 digits on the invoice? I'm not quite sure. Might need you to clarify that question, Andrea. I think the answer is we need to see some sort of proof of payment from you to show that money is coming out of your account and paying a vendor before we can reimburse you. And so, yes, I think we would either need to see the bank statement or we would need to see those canceled checks. In entering the salary amount, is that net pay or gross pay for each individual? Brenda?
That can be, I mean, that's the, you can include the gross pay on the spreadsheets. The obviously when you pay them, it'll be the net pay. We would have to, like, the backup documentation would include the total payroll information that would show both of those numbers so that we can track it all and make sure it all matches up and makes sense.
Yeah. On lease payments, are we able to submit all invoices from March?
If you were, it depends on what you're doing, right? So if it's lease payments on your, I'm assuming it's lease payments on like rent payments, and if it's lease payments on, well, I guess let's clarify what are the lease payments for? Is it equipment or is it so is it overhead or is it which would still be the same for rent as well? It all depends on if you're using reduction of sales or if you're using closure periods. And if you're using closure periods, then it would be for those months where you were closed or had reduced hours. If it is loss of sales, it depends on the period that you are showing that you have reduced sales.
Yep. So what if I pay in cash? I have an invoice and receipt, but I pay in cash upon delivery. Is my receipt okay to submit?
As long as you have to have all of the information on the receipt. So there has to be clearly show that who the vendor is, what the items were, how much was paid, and that it was paid. It has to show that it was paid as well.
Yep. Are architect fees reimbursed?
For, I mean, I guess it would have to be a COVID reason. So the architect fee would not be part of overhead. So need to, I would have to understand the specific item, but whatever they would be building or using an architect for would have to be something that would be an eligible COVID health reason that qualifies for the grant.
So for example, if it were connected to an eligible facility reconfiguration, then architect fees would be eligible, but it needs to be connected to an eligible expense within one of the categories. Many of my payments were paid by electronic transfer. I uploaded that proof of payment for each of those expenses. Do I also have to show the funds coming out of the bank account by submitting the corresponding statement? I think this is a case where if the information is not there that we need to see on your application, Kay, then our reviewer will reach out to you and ask for additional documentation. As long as on that, the printouts from your electronic banking that you provide to us, we can clearly see that the payment has been processed. We can see the name of the person on the account, and we can see the name of the institution that holds the account. Then I think your documentation will be okay, but it's hard to say without seeing that. And as I've said before, our reviewers will reach out to you if we need additional documentation. If additional modifications are required to the reimbursement request, can they be made after the 16th? Yes, they can. Got a delivery vehicle, and just to clarify that last statement, so if we request additional documentation from you, obviously we don't expect to have that in before the 16th. We would certainly give you probably a 3-day turnaround on that is what we would ask. So be ready to have your eye on your email over the next few weeks as we're looking at these, because we do have to have all payments made per federal guidance by December 30th. We bought a delivery vehicle for pivoting to home delivery. If we pay it outright, can we submit the whole price? So we will cover expenses paid between March 1st and November 16th on vehicles or other equipment purchases. So if you can pay the entire amount, then yes, we will pay that. Now, as I mentioned on loans, we will only pay the amount that you've paid on the loan between March 1st and November 16th. Brenda, this individual has a holding company that wholly owns a number of separate subsidiaries. One of the separate subsidiaries is eligible for grants. Our payroll runs through the parent holding company. For all subsidiaries, will this cause a problem? What documentation would you want to see as you're reviewing?
We would need to see that the I think we would need to see that the company that the applicant has paid the holding company for those salaries. And I mean, we do think about that a little bit, but in general, the applicant actually has to spend the money. So and I'm not sure how your funds flow with multiple companies like that, how you do it, but generally the applicant company has to be the one that's spending the money.
Okay. So Dan, when we get to your application, if you go ahead and submit those expenses, then we'll take a look at it. I would recommend that you look for other expenses as well and submit those as well. Okay, next question. Allison, if we weren't open in March 2019 or April 2019, she bought the business in April of 2019 and has no sales data to compare to until May 2019, will they be eligible for loss of revenue? So first and foremost, we cannot reimburse just outright on loss of revenue. It has to be for overhead expenses connected to loss of revenue. And I would say that if you don't have documentation for those months, then we will not be able to reimburse you. Rob, on the overhead category, you can change, you can flex across categories. You can request reimbursement for expenses that weren't in your initial application that you submitted. Certainly, we understand that things have shifted and changed and continue to evolve since you submitted your initial application. So if you have expenses that you think fall within the eligibility, then you can certainly submit those across the various categories. How much of rent or mortgage is covered? So all of the overhead expenses are based on a prorated amount, and Paul earlier in the webinar walked through how to calculate that. There are also videos available online that will walk you through how to calculate the prorated amount eligible for both salaries and for the overhead category. I would strongly encourage you to go out and take a look at those walkthrough videos. You can pause them, you know, go through them at your own pace. And so I would strongly encourage everyone to take a look at those if you are requesting rent or overhead to figure out how much your of your rent or overhead is eligible. How do I get to the different spreadsheets? I'm only able to access one sheet. So Shanice, you'll need to make sure that you have all of the categories selected. So first, in the first few questions in the form, there's a question that asks you which categories you're requesting reimbursement for. You'll need to make sure that if you want to request reimbursement for salaries or overhead and access those spreadsheets, that you are selecting the salaries and overhead checkbox on that question. If you have not received your email from Submittable, say is that you want to make sure that you are checking to be sure that you're checking the email account that was listed for the executive director on your account. And Paul, if you don't mind, would you make me the presenter, please? The next thing that you're going to want to do if you haven't been able to access your Submittable account is go to submittable.com and click the login button. Once you click that login button, then you're going to click Forgot Password. Then you can enter that email address for the executive director listed on your application, and an email will be sent to the executive director asking them to reset their password. From there, you can log in and you can view your application and reimbursement form. Okay, we're going to have to end there. We will have another webinar on Monday. We'll have 2 webinars on Monday for the small business grant. We definitely encourage you to check those out. Again, we are working to answer questions over the weekend that we get into the help desk and in through the grants email. You can always find resources available online at ded.mo.gov/cares. We will be posting this training at ded.mo.gov/cares. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your afternoon.